So this slide basically is just a different view of the previous timeline. Once again, I'd emphasize, you see where Jho Low was born in 1981. He's 27 years old during this phase, and he's still stealing up until mid 2016. And Najib was not voted out of office until 2018. So he was successful in, controlling a lot of the backlash. Not all of it. There was still a lot of negative press before 2018. But as far as formal investigations, Jho Low was in a position where he could influence that, or in some cases, absolutely stop it. And then there was the election results in 2018. So this puts all of that into perspective.
Yes, and what I find very interesting about, of course, this is a fantastic slide. I think that it gives, the timeline and the major incident that took place is very, makes it a little easier for. What I find very interesting here is in the middle, in the middle column, right after 2007, when, he was he was not very successful in convincing the investment, but then he reached out to Yusuf al-Utaiba, right? After that, things became very, very, very interesting, and I think it moved very fast after that.
Yeah, I would agree with all that, and I would add that, remember, Jho Low's overall narrative had two parts. One was he was telling everyone in Malaysia, I can bring Middle Eastern money into Malaysia that will help both you personally, but presumably help the Malaysian economy, which, considering what happened with the financial crisis just before that, would have been welcome sources of investment. So he was holding out the fact that he had access to all of the UAE PEPs as a reason for everyone to help him in Malaysia. But similarly, over in the Middle East, he was promising the wealthy there access and the ability to profit in Malaysia. Now, in some cases, that was illicit. People were embezzling from the investment, and we'll go through that in great detail. But on a more benign level, he was telling the people, we're both Islamic economies. There should be more and more financial ties between us, and I can make that happen because I know both Malaysian PEPs and UAE PEPs, and I can put you together. And obviously he greatly distorted that and stole billions of dollars. But there is some intellectual appeal to putting together different groups of people who presumably have some shared interest and can jointly benefit. One is the investor, and the other is the place for the investment to occur.
Right. Yeah. And if I can go a little bit back on your point on sovereign wealth fund, I found it very interesting because, as you pointed out, that it was not really a sovereign wealth fund. But this whole case has, I feel that has been a very powerful tool in this whole 1MDB case, because we see that Mubadala Development Company, which was also another sovereign wealth fund. And so if you can little bit, from your experience, talk about the risks that lies with sovereign wealth fund, and what are the basic, absolutely basic stuff that one needs to look out when they're dealing with sovereign wealth fund?
Okay, well, that's a really good question. Let me unbundle that a little bit. One is, I want to once again emphasize the difference between a sovereign wealth fund and maybe a development vehicle, both of which come under the umbrella of a state-owned enterprise. And so your question, from my perspective, is probably more easily answered using the term state-owned enterprise, because that would include both sovereign wealth funds and development funds and other types of government guarantees. Before I get into that, which is the core of your question, sovereign wealth funds traditionally are countries that have a separate source of revenue. It could be, oil. You have sovereign wealth funds out of the Scandinavian countries, particularly Norway, because of the North Sea oil. You have other countries that have other resources, and certainly in the Middle East, you have sovereign wealth funds. They have already generated the wealth. They already have the money, and they're just looking for ways to deploy it, presumably to benefit the people. And there's a lot of economic analysis that says that sovereign wealth funds have to be very careful about the impact of investing that money on their domestic economies, because if they invest it in their domestic economies, they can greatly distort the other businesses, the non-oil businesses in the Middle East. And so they want those to thrive as well. And so a lot of times the sovereign wealth funds will look for foreign investment. One is diversification, but the other is to avoid the adverse effects of crowding out, other businesses just because of the sheer amount of money that's coming in from the oil. Development funds, on the other hand, generally are more debt-driven, and so what you'll have is the government will sponsor bonds, they'll guarantee various contracts, they'll basically have the full faith in the government behind it. Now, that will generate money that is essentially state money that very much looks like a sovereign wealth fund, but the problem is that it's funded by debt, not by already earned money. And so then you have the interest on the debt. So if I was to steal the proceeds of the loan, which Jho Low did, and therefore that's not generating the income, one of Jho Low's biggest problems was, how do I service the debt on the money that I stole? And very, very quickly, that debt is getting into the billions of dollars. And so it becomes a much bigger problem for him on servicing the debt than just the money he stole.
Right. That's what the desperation was. He was so desperate to find ways to service his debt.
That's exactly right. Now, going to the core portion of your question, when you have state-owned enterprises, and I'll have a whole module on this later in this series on state-owned enterprises, so I'll just go into it very generally here. But the problem that you have with state-owned enterprises is you necessarily have, individuals who are employed by the government, to basically, become gatekeepers on how that money is used. Once you have government employees who have that gatekeeper responsibility on the state-owned funds, you're creating opportunities for people to try to corrupt their judgment, and for maybe a relatively low amount of money, they can benefit individuals in who are benefiting from that money at the expense of the people of Malaysia or the people that they're supposed to be protecting. So, it's your traditional kleptocracy issue, where you have money that is supposed to be used for the benefit of the overall country or people, and you have bureaucrats who may be corrupted to use their decision-making power for the benefit of a very small group.
Yeah, exactly. I think that money and power is a powerful combination indeed, and one has to be very, very careful. And then, so my last point on the sovereign wealth fund is thank you for your great responses on those. My last point on sovereign wealth fund for now is, so when there's a financial crisis, right? As this started in 2008, shouldn't this be a point to many websites or many places on the net still calling this as a sovereign wealth fund? And you just rightly pointed out the exact nature of this 1MDB with the debt factor into it. So, normally people would assume that when a country is doing good, when the economy is doing good, the reserves are there and the country is trying to diversify its portfolio in terms of, like, if they are only investing into oil or some other they want to diversify and they want to make a sovereign wealth fund. But because there was a financial crisis in the background, this makes it a bit odd. So now it makes sense, with the debt factor coming into play.